everyone to today's second Saturday session, June 11th, 2022. And today we have for the panel, Feminism, Art, and Global Action, Collaborations in the Global Context. Our panel co-chairs are Susan Osmond, Lydia Nakashima-Degarrod, okay. Yes. Marguerite, Elliot, Nirmal Raja, and our respondent is Jane Chin Davidson. All right, so I am going to turn it over to Lydia to get the panel rolling. Thank you everyone for coming, and let's get on with the show. Lydia,
okay, thank you so much for the introduction. And I'm going to talk about what the panel is about, first of all. And the topic is feminist artists have been at the forefront of collaborative art. Collaborative work across borders and on themes like migration and cultural, as well as economic and political hegemony, has been generative of new ways of making, displaying, and performing art. This panel invites artists to reflect on their collaborations in the global context, as well as the impact of globalization and collective transnational activities on their individual work. Reflecting on their own projects, panelists will explore how cross-border and global projects can shape new artistic vocabularies and practices in the context of global inequalities. Questions might include, how did funding and institutional structures influence their work? How did the location and publics for the works influence the relationship of artists from wealthy or developing countries in the project? What cultural repertoires were foregrounded in the work? How were diverse publics in different countries envisioned and engaged? Can feminist approaches with emphasis on collaboration overcome power imbalances? What kinds of feminist discourses are embedded or further developed in the making of the transnational collaborative artwork panelists present? By inviting panelists to explore their work with these and related questions in mind, the panel will naturally include dialogue on movements to decolonize art, on the changing landscape of the global art market, and the role of the individual artist. It will provide an occasion to reflect on feminist art, not only as it is impacted by globalization, but as an active generative movement that creates new art forms and practices for critically apprehending global processes and powers by redirecting or swimming upstream of global flows. Focusing on concrete projects, individual artists will add to the collective discussion about the artistic and political value of collaborative transnational work, along with its difficulties, pitfalls, and blind spots. Looking to the future from the perspective of existing work, the panel will be an opportunity to reflect on artists as agents of change, political action, and social justice in ways that highlight the entanglement of the local and the global. So our first panelist is going to be Susan Osmond from UC Riverside.
Actually, I think maybe we'll go around and introduce everybody. So I'll start, I'll introduce myself, and then I'll come back to, once we have, I think it's good to have an idea of the full panel just briefly. So I'm Susan Osmond. I'm an artist and also an anthropologist. I currently teach at UC Riverside in California. And as of August 1st, I'm going to be joining New York University Abu Dhabi campus to work with them specifically on how you can join scholars and artists in collaborative projects. So I'm very excited about that. So I'll pass it on to Jane, since she's next to me in the little boxes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. My name is Jane Chin Davidson. I hope you can hear me okay. And we never did really check the sound, but I am an art historian. I teach at Cal State San Bernardino, and I initiated the Art History and Global Cultures BA program, so that it's no longer a standard art history for the state university. I think that that's pretty much what I should introduce about myself so far. I'm also a DEI advocate, diversity, equity, inclusion fellow, working on inclusion as a non-normative reflection in our institutions today. Thank you.
Maybe Nirmal, you want to?
Hello, my name is Nirmal Raja. I am based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I am a full-time artist and an independent curator periodically. My work has a lot to do with migration and feminism, so this is a perfect subject to be discussing with you all. Thank you again.
Marguerite?
Good. Okay. And let me know if the sound is not
Fine.
loud enough. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Okay, hi, I'm Marguerite Elliot. I'm an artist, a sculptor in Northern California. I'm just north of San Francisco, and I'm on the board of the local NCWCA chapter with Priscilla. Great to see Priscilla here today. Anyway, my work has been about environmental issues for a really, really long time. And then in the last probably 5 years or more, I've been doing art residencies, probably 8 or 10 art residencies overseas. And I started interacting with the environment over there. So I'm really honored to be on this panel today. And my work is I interact with and collaborate with the environment and the local people there. So I'll be sharing slides from those projects. Thank you.
Lydia.
Okay. Hello, my name is Lydia Nakashima-Degarrod. I'm originally from Chile. I am a cultural anthropologist as well as a visual artist, and I create artists that blur the line between ethnography and visual art. I teach at the California College of the Arts, and also I sit at the advisory board of the Asian American Women Artists Association. And recently I've been working on issues associated with forced migration. So I'll be talking about that during my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so now I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to try to go quickly, and I figure we'll come back to some of what Lydia put out as our kind of script for this is huge. All these questions, and we could write a book about any of those questions. So I'm going to just share very quickly some notes and then a little bit of video to show you. I thought it would be nice to actually show people in collaboration on one of my projects. So I'm going to share my screen and share and get you to, I just have a short, why is it not going to the right place? Sorry. I should be an expert at this being a teacher, but as you're saying, okay, there we go. So I'm thinking about creating scenes for global collaboration and creation. You know, a lot of times when we think about feminist art, we sometimes think more about the topics. So, and other times we think more about the way that we do things. How is it that a feminist approach is different in not just the topic, but in how we approach collaboration or art making more generally. So I recently wrote about this in this book called Shifting World, Shaping Fieldwork, a memoir of anthropology and art, in which I go into much more detail about what I'm going to be talking about today. One of the, this is an example, I did this very local, Riverside, California based set of work, starting with one painting that I made of laundry on the line. And I need not go into all the details to imagine, you know, who does your laundry, where does your laundry go? Starting with one painting, I developed an exhibition. And then little by little, it became a remake collaborative exhibition that came in. We went to a mall and inhabited an empty shop and made that into an exhibition space that then became a performance space. So there were many art forms in that, and many opportunities for things like story circles. And then finally, we went outside and hung our, quote, laundry art around Riverside, California libraries, thanks to a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. So as this project grew, getting back to that question of, say, funding and collaboration, we brought international artists. There were about 100 artists who took part in this over the course of 3 years. It included ethnography, it included, you know, as I mentioned, exhibitions, performances, and we were able to fund everybody because we could get, we were very local. And so bringing the global to the local actually was something that today, at least in the United States, can be readily funded. And so that gets to some of those questions. Another project that I've been working on, and where I'm going to show you a little video, is called the Moving Matters Traveling Workshop. So in this case, instead of going from art to ethnography to back to art, we're working with the book that I wrote where I was studying people who've lived in several countries. So it's what I call serial migrants. From this concept, we brought together a group, initial group of collaborators who worked across different media. Some were visual artists, some were performers, some were scholars who practiced also things like creative writing. And from that initial core, we built a group, but not in one single place, going from Amsterdam to Paris to Bucharest and etc., doing site-specific art and bringing our group together, but also adding members as we moved on to think of questions of migration. This was much harder to, you know, so actually doing the global work was much more complicated to put together, not just because we were dealing with different sites, but because funding mechanisms are really focused on bringing the global to the local site. So everywhere we went, whether we were in Amsterdam or Barcelona or Santa Monica, etc., we had to appeal to local or national instances to get money. So there wasn't something like you can go to, you know, just the way the granting structure was and the institutional structure was, each time we depended on our collaborators in each individual museum or art center or NGO to make those connections. And a lot of times we ended up funding one another. So those of us who had a little money from something, whether our own pocket or a grant that we could, you know, push to this, would fund those who just didn't have those means, who came from systems or countries that had, you know, less funding available. So I don't want to keep you, you know, too long on this time, but I'm just gonna, I wanted to focus on, besides that, you know, funding difference, how, you know, the international group actually works, because it didn't start out, as I said, you know, the Clothesline project was very gender oriented from the very beginning, just by its, you know, by its topic. Migration, well, if you look at migration, yes, it's become more feminized in the last 10 to 15 years, but there wasn't inherently. It was much more in the way that we collaborated, that our group, which has kind of reflection moments and exchanges during and, you know, throughout the process, it's a very reflective process. It was more how we were working on it, and the fact that overall, it did tend to attract more female or, you know, female identified artists than males. It doesn't mean we didn't have men in the group, but the way that we were working oftentimes did not, similarly as it didn't work toward, you know, getting a grant that would cover everything to do this international project, it also wasn't so easy to, it was more like an incubator for our work that we could then show elsewhere. And it wasn't something you could put on your resume and say, I showed with, you know, in this place, because a lot of the places that we developed this, we worked in an archaeology museum and remade that. We do a lot of site-specific work, even in events, like Lydia and I went to a conference once in London, and we put out, some of these collaborative things that we do and made everybody get involved. We did something at the Berlin Wall Monument. They have a wonderful chapel there. We did a month-long series of things there, but it's not the same as saying, oh, I got into this really fancy art event. So some of the men that we encountered, we talked about this in our group, how they tended to, well, I'm not going to do that because I want to only put things on my resume that, count toward showing how famous I am. So there is that was really interesting. And then of course, that does, as you'll see, this is just one example I've chosen. We have other videos that are much more, fancy, that look cool and everything. But I wanted to show you this one because it shows us at work. It's when we were in Amsterdam in 2014. Since then, we've done some maybe more fully realized work because as the group has grown, our aesthetic has been confirmed. But I thought that for today's group, you might enjoy seeing this video because it shows us actually collaborating.
Oh, okay, so that's what you're doing the whole thing, sorry, I didn't understand. Yeah, because we're not all here still. Everybody should just dance along, I'm serious, I'm serious, dance. You're not serious. No, but I like your dancing. That's it, yeah. Excellent, I love it. Even when the Ganesh is fresh, you guys should be dancing. Yeah. Something, whatever, I'm moving.
What I'm thinking is, yes, so before.
After the diggers.
Yeah, well, we can do it that way. Or do we want you here for her?
Sorry,
And you can take your bag. Yes. So let's walk through that. Let's just do that now. You're going straight up the stairs. Let's see if it's gonna work. Let's see what happens. Okay, so let's use the elevator. Yes.
Why don't you come move a little bit out of the way, because I think the musicians are gonna come down,
Okay.
just for a little bit.
Like now?
Yeah.
All right. So. Perfect.
And you guys like, so you're gonna like do something like. You know what, listen, Harvey, you gotta listen to me for a second.
Okay, so everyone stop.
They can't
Stop.
actually go right away. If they do that, the audience is not gonna know where to go next. They're gonna start. I go first and you follow me?
I read you the first one down. I'll try to take it here.
Stop.
I'm here.
Is there anybody? Sorry. Everybody's here.
What is the purpose of your visit? Do you have anything to declare? remain where you are. Right.
Yes.
How long will you be staying?
Oh, I'm partner in your one.
Excuse me, I didn't get it.
I'm a woman. I'm good, of course. I made a gold and bronze.
That's a great time. I don't even know if they still are doing things. What are you doing here?
And Nirmal said, why are you eating? It's lunchtime. You're a Ramadan. You're not supposed to eat. Oh, I'm not staying.
So this isn't it.
Go back to the other way.
Let's just do it the way we did it before.
Let's decide where I will stay.
Stay wherever you land after you folded the back tablecloth, just stand right there. Go.
Okay, I will stay here.
No, right there.
No, you can begin to.
So you're right. On the record.
Say it again. Que las dos están paradas acá. No, I agree that she's like supporting.
I completely agree.
Okay. How are you doing?
I'm fine. There's a new guy in town. Did you see that?
Louder, guys. Louder?
There's a new guy in town. Did you see that?
Stop the gossiping.
I'm not gossiping. Go on.
He's talking. How can he?
Such a baby already talking.
How old are you? How old are we?
What's your capital?
Fill it out.
Okay, so this is the Moving Matters Traveling Workshop at Work. This was several years ago in Amsterdam. As you could see, it was in a Mediterranean Antiquities Museum, and we were thinking about, how objects migrated to the museum and how people could not migrate there. And so we were playing different roles, but I thought that this was interesting because you could see that there's different games going on in this space. We recreated the path by actually putting in art objects, which I couldn't, show everything today, but we had a path.
Try this strange 10-second technique tonight to reverse
Sorry
type 2
about that.
diabetes. Most people continue to take blood sugar medications because
Sorry about that. And so we create the scene, and then within that, there are these things going on. So you could see that there were some people sort of focusing on the whole performance, and then there'd be these side conversations. And each time it's a little bit different because the group of people who are there change. In this particular one, there were 13 people involved. In other ones, say the one that we did in Berlin, we had about 40 artists involved, either as creating the scene through visual art, and then working in different performances. Sometimes there's one big performance, sometimes there are several smaller performances. And there's always this interaction where we use elements from the environment, sort of site-specific and art, that then builds this group. So I think I've probably exceeded my my time already. So I'm going to pass it on to the next person, who is Marguerite. And thank you for your attention.
Unmute. And I'm gonna go screen share.
Just
Yeah.
go push screen share.
Hold on. Here,
There you go.
I say. Here we go. Minimize that. And hold on. Why is that? Now sharing screen. I'm trying to get the full view. It's hold on.
Is this a slideshow?
Yeah, what I'm not seeing is,
See at the top, it says slideshow. You can probably click
oh,
on.
there you go. Okay. Yeah, it looks different than when I was looking at it earlier. Slideshow here. Let's start at the top here. I'm still not getting the full screen. That's weird.
If you click
You,
on
still,
slideshow,
you have to click on presentation, slideshow,
and
there you
then
go,
let
and
the-
then play from start.
Oh, presenter view.
Or, yeah, or, yeah.
Oh, there we go. How's that? No.
No, play
No,
from
that's-
start. Go back and do play from start.
Here, presenter view.
All the
Oh,
way
play
to the
from-
left. There you go. All the way. Keep going.
more.
Oh,
There you go.
there we go.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. Woohoo. Okay, so I'm just going to read you a little bit of what I wrote for that describes what I do, which is, okay, like I said in my intro, I've been concerned with the environment for a long time, using seed pods, leaves, stones in my work. So concerned with the current environmental destruction, loss of species, and irreversible environmental change is taking place all over the world, my work functions as both a reliquary and a shrine to what is lost or soon may be lost. So for the past decade, I've been able to travel extensively and created and installed works nationally and internationally. My Sentinel series has focused on the precarious intersection of technology and the environment, while also addressing the feminine, spiritual, and that which is unknown. My collaboration includes connection to place, interaction with the climate, and mythology. Inspired by ubiquitous cell phone towers, Sentinels stand guard and witness the climate crisis, while also grounding us to the earth. So in each location, I collaborated with local residents and artists to incorporate materials and images unique to the locations. So my sculptures shed the galleries and enclosed privileged art spaces and became public. They were no longer in the domain of quote unquote art audiences. This work is an extension of my previous work, which focused on feminist, environmental, anti-nuclear, and homeless issues. So collaborations in each of these locations included contributions to both content and process. I've been fortunate to spend time in these various locations, creating works on site that remain permanently installed after my departure. They serve as transnational collaborations reflective of the concerns that are now shared universally. So let's see. So the first piece I did was when I was in the Arctic a while ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago in Kemijärvi. It was a very remote location. And as I was traveling through the Arctic, I was going through vast stretches of wilderness and untouched forests and nobody around. And I was totally reliant on my GPS. I was traveling alone in a car for hours at a time. It was just beautiful, totally beautiful, took my breath away. And I was so reliant on cell phone towers to get me from place to place to place. And while I was at this residency and talking to the people in the community there, I was made aware that the Arctic is warming up 3 times faster than any other place on the earth. And it's just horrifying to know what's happening. So the indigenous folks up there are Samis, which are what we would call Laplanders, but they're really Samis. And this is the image at the top here is the Sami goddess of the earth. so, and that one, they're all permanently installed unless I say otherwise. So I came back to the States, and I was at another residency in upstate New York. And I'm thinking about these sentinels and standing guard over the earth and while grounding us. So I incorporated a goddess at the top and these leaves that were hanging down on wires, and this spins around. So it adds visual interest and directs our eyes up from the ground up to the top. And she is sending out energy to the earth, to the universe, to our world to help us with this awful climate destruction that we're going through. And this is one that's similar, that instead of being installed in New York, this is in Fairfax, and this is a temporary installation in downtown Fairfax, which is the town where I live just north of San Francisco. It looks very different at night with it lit up. And a Nordic Sentinel in search of a safe harbor. I created this one when I was in, obviously, an artist residency in Denmark. And this residency was really cool because there's this huge park. It would go for several miles in each direction. It was open to the public. I mean, all these places where I installed it, it's open to the public. They had sculptures in all these little nooks and crannies all over the park. It was this wonderful discovery. And I'm doing the Sentinel, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what is this Sentinel going to be honoring or calling attention to? And at the time, it was during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, where they were agreeing that the woman who was on the stand, testifying about her incident with Brett Kavanaugh, I was just horrified that this woman was being attacked and unsafe. So this one is Freya, the Nordic goddess of love and environment. And as I was thinking about what to put on top, I'm talking to the residents there, to the people, in the park, like what's important to them. And in Denmark, they're very much steeped in Nordic tradition. So I was going to look at Nordic sites where they have the old Viking ships and whatnot. So this is symbolic of a Nordic vessel. And here she is guiding it to a safe harbor. Because I feel like in these troubled times that we've been in for the last bunches of years, that I feel very strongly about women connecting to each other and guiding us to safe places and calling our attention to the things that need to be addressed, like climate, feminist issues, all kinds of things. And again, here, it's a little bit hard to see. There's some gold leafed leaves. I use gold leaf as a spiritual connection. And the leaves, again, it spins around and points our direction down to the earth and connects us to the earth. And also, I mean, what was really cool is, I had come up with several ideas about what to, put up here, and sort of this place of honor and holding it up to the light was talking to people there, because we went through various iterations, and this is what was meaningful to them. They love the piece, and it stands in the front of the sculpture park. And it's not just like art audiences that comes to the sculpture park. It's a forest where people go jogging every day, and people from all around the towns, the neighbor towns, come and enjoy nature. So I felt very honored that they put this in the front of their huge forest. This piece I did, it's Nevada Sentinel, the ground upon which we stand. And this is placed in a sculpture park in Nevada, where I spent 2 months at a residency there 2 years ago. It was during COVID. And again, I'm thinking about what is important to this place. And my work has become, because I've been overseas and done these various projects overseas, what's important to that place. And I'm thinking about the indigenous people that lived there before we came, and I was investigating how they carved on rocks and all the symbols that they put on rocks, which I didn't want to do, but I wanted to honor the ground upon which we stand. So this is a stone that I picked out that was from that area, and I placed it on top, and it's kind of a sacred symbol at the top with the leaves pointing us down to the ground and our relationship to the earth and the importance of trees. And this one I did in Ireland last year. Wow. Also during the pandemic. I was so lucky to be able to do these things. I was in Ireland, and it's a very remote place. A lot of the places I've been have been fairly remote. And this is on the west coast of Ireland, and the Burren, which is this amazing area. And they're very much connected to mythology there, the Irish mythology or the Druid mythology, and the spirits that are underground, as well as the spirits that are above the ground. And I was working with another artist there, in the wild. I went there with the intention of working with other people physically to, put up something. And what we discovered was that there was a strong connection between what's underground and what's above the ground. And we go to these holy wells that were there, during Druid times or before Druid, certainly before Christianity. And people would tie prayers onto the trees and nearby bushes at these holy wells. And that custom is universal throughout the world. And I've seen it in Japan and various other places. So we were incorporating that into this piece, which is much more ephemeral. And it's about, 12 feet tall. We use these poles that we found that the same wood came from the same trees that the Druids used. And this is us hanging bits of cloth and paper and just ephemeral materials that would blow in the wind. And we saw it as them sending blessings out into the universe, and also grounded at the same time through the wood poles that are anchored into the ground. That's Diffin Wild, my partner, in installing this work. And it was just so much fun working with her and doing this piece, and not having to be worried about, is it going to be permanent, because we designed it not to be permanent. And this is the last piece I'm going to show you, which is called Where Have All the Birds Gone? And it was in Fairfax for close to a year, installed publicly there. Yeah, it's about the 2.9 billion birds, close to 3 probably by now, that have been lost over the last 50 years. So when you start researching birds, it's just been decimated, and it's by man-made causes: pesticides, habitat loss, climate issues. And this piece is about 15 feet tall. Again, I always use red because it calls attention to, and those are sacred colors, the red and the gold. And also I realized that, I'm steeped in feminism. I was in the forefront of feminist art back in the 70s in Los Angeles. So I just see, any kind of a large statement sculpture. It's so uncommon for women to be sculptors and to work in metal. I do all the welding myself and do large pieces. So between thinking about the environment and what to call attention to, and collaborating with the local climate and what the community likes and whatnot, it's just been a win-win for me. And this piece is now currently down in Newport Beach Civic Center Sculpture Park. So that is it for today. And I'm looking forward to any questions you might have later. Thank you. Stop share.
Thank you. So who is next?
Nirmal?
Okay, great. I will share my screen. All right. Here we go. Hold on, I just want to make sure I check the sound button. Sharing, share sound. Oh. As a transnational feminist and an immigrant, I consider the local with a global lens. It is from this perspective I acknowledge that Milwaukee, where I live, is on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homeland, and where these nations remain present. My feminism transcends borders because my identity also does. I grew up in many places within India and then spent some time in South Korea and Hong Kong before moving to the United States 30 years ago. For some reason or the other, home became a transient idea. A lot of my work, like this one, addresses that notion of movement and memory, the memories we gather and are molded by. I use mutable materials like wax, spices, and fabric to speak to the mutability of one's identity when crossing borders. As immigrants, we often have to reinvent ourselves as a means of survival. Sometimes this transformation is empowering, and sometimes it is erasing. My work has a lot to do with excavating the in-between spaces between cultures and places, and somehow making meaning through a perspective of always coming from elsewhere. But the work can also be a point of entry for other people to understand the state of in-betweenness through poetic gentleness. In some of my work, I explore language and what can be communicated outside of language and in between language. For an immigrant, a border is always present, literally and metaphorically. Door hangings like this one have been used to welcome good spirits and guests into the home for centuries and are deeply tied to Indian aesthetic and spiritual culture. The next work explores how doorways and borders are portals to the outside and inside. Borders define a country, acting as gatekeepers for a secure and safe nation. But they are also portals to other places, to safety, prosperity, and security. They are often the most treacherous and contentious passageways and remain examples of a divided and fragmented globe. In this work, I depict the most dangerous land borders in the world: the Gaza Strip, Syria and Turkey, US and Mexico, India and Pakistan, North Korea and South Korea. If I were to make this work today, I would probably include Russia and the Ukraine and a couple of others. Through this work, I imagine what it would be like if these borders became welcome ports and the line between insider and outsider is blurred. The work is hung high, inviting viewers to walk under them, symbolically crossing the most dangerous land borders in the world. I urge viewers to think about the Earth as a global village and borders as passageways for human and material exchanges rather than fault lines where lives are lost. This work, Blurred Boundaries, seeks to disturb and displace the very intent of a map, to locate and identify. It makes mapping an act of power and challenges us by undoing maps into a fragile network using hand cutting. This work is an act of disregarding boundaries that divide us and asks the viewer to imagine the world as an interconnected and interdependent network of connections, conduits and tethers that bind us, especially in the face of larger issues of climate change. The pandemic has taught us that we are a global community. What affects some people on the other side of the globe will eventually have an effect on us. A tear in the global fabric places all of humanity at risk. We have to acknowledge this reality and work together as a community. That brings me to some of my curatorial work. I curated a transnational exhibition in Chennai of artists working with Korean paper, hanji. It was at this reception that I had the opportunity to give a tour to the VIP guests who were diplomats from the Korean and American consulates. It struck me that art can have a similar function to diplomacy. Art becomes a powerful tool to bring together people and communicate on a most human level. But back to the local. Although I became a citizen on paper a long time ago, it was not until recently that I fully began to understand what that really meant. The results of the 2016 elections suddenly made me feel like an outsider in Milwaukee and propelled me to reach out to another artist, Lois Bielefeld, with an idea for a collaborative project in response to increasing racial polarity in the United States. Over 2 years of working together, we launched 2 collaborative projects exploring identity, place, and belonging. While one project examined the role of garment and our visual understanding of race, the other project questions the veracity of recorded history and our attempts to contend with it. One of the projects is reaching through 5.5 yards and 8,497 miles, a series of performance-based photography. I moved to the United States 30 years ago while Lois is a Milwaukee native. I have amassed over 150 saris, an integral part of my culture, but living in Milwaukee, I rarely wear them due to both internalized social pressures and practicality. For this project, I wore the sari as an act of resistance against conformity and reclaiming the right to look different and yet belong. While wearing one of my barely used saris, I traversed Milwaukee's urban landscape as Lois documented my movement. We made over 70 images in both mundane and landmark locations like the Milwaukee Public Museum and also at quintessential Milwaukee events like the farmers market. Part social experiment and part performance, the work has become a statement of occupying space in a town where I have only felt superficially at home. The Women's March gave me an opportunity to exercise my identity as an intersectional feminist who actively participates in protest without conforming to a single Western notion of feminism, what feminism should be. This particular image was made at the Sikh temple of Wisconsin, where several people lost their lives when a white supremacist went on a shooting rampage in 2012. I began to understand the potential of collaboration as a powerful tool to make work with its own unique identity. I enjoyed the collaborative work so much that I wanted to know what other collaborative work is going on, especially transnationally. I wanted to inspire young people in the art world to reach out, think beyond immediate surroundings, and make work together. I curated a show last year at the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design that included more than 30 artists working in many disciplines. Reimagining the Global Village showcases transnational art collaboration among artists and between artists and communities. This exhibition is an ambitious but necessarily incomplete survey of various strategies artists have employed while working towards a more connected and caring world. There are 3 sections to this exhibition. The first one explores individual artists working with other artists in a different country. For example, Milwaukee-based artist Jill Sebastian worked with Liz Bach-Huber in Germany to create this live installation, bringing in their common long-term interest in sustainability. The pea plants in this installation are grown, harvested, and consumed by the artists. The waste from the plants and the shredded correspondence between the artists are composted in a worm box, which then becomes soil to grow the pea plants. Everything is self-contained and constantly happening within the gallery space. The next section of the exhibition explores the work between artists and communities in a different country. This amazing quilt is the work of Pamela Longobardi, an Atlanta-based artist and professor, along with refugees in Lesvos, Greece. It is titled Night Flag of Lesvos and constructed in the refugee camps using the outer layer of the very life vests that helped them survive their precarious journey. The quilt stands as a witness and testament to their courage and strength. The exhibition also included the work of 3 global collectives. This one is the Postcard Collective, which announces a theme periodically, and members from all over the world create and exchange postcards in response to that theme. Examining these strategies of connection, solidarity, and collaboration is inspiring to say the least. Their work acknowledges the immense diversity and inequality that exists in the world and places the artist as a bridge between these polarities. The resulting artwork briefly gives the viewer a larger perspective, opening up an array of possibilities and avenues of communication that is liberating, inclusive, and expansive. It also puts in perspective the immense fragility of this blue dot that we call the earth. Viewed this way, the immigrant artist and the collaborative artist is especially suited for expressing notions of interconnectedness, reciprocity, and healing. The virtual exhibition is still active, and I will post a link in the chat box so you can explore this work at your leisure. Thank you so much. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions. It's just kind of a condensed version of all that I do.
Thank you. Are we going to do, Susan, are we going to do all the questions at the end?
I think so, yeah, because we have Jane who's going to do a summing up. So Lydia will be next, and then Jane will speak before we do the questions.
Thank you, Nirmal.
Lydia, you're muted.
Okay, so I hope that you can see now. Yes? Okay. For the last 14 years, I have created art installations that address the experience of forced migration. Just a minute. For some reason, it's going very fast. Okay, I'll start now. For the last 14 years, I have created art installations that address the experience of forced migration from a variety of perspectives and involving different forms of collaboration. I have collaborated with political exiles from Chile who were expelled from their home country over 40 years ago and have lived in the United States ever since. I have created works about my own family experience, migrating from Japan to Peru and to Chile. The creation of these art installations entailed long periods of collaboration, ranging from 18 months to 2 years, and were centered primarily on the participants' reflections on and recollections of the past. Forced migration creates dissonant and conflicting reflections and conceptions of the homeland, the host country, and the selves created by this experience which is passed on to other generations. I found that in spite of these often painful recollections and realizations about the past, the participants, including myself, found in the process of creating these installations that they were embodied practices that recreated both the homeland and themselves, while enabling the emergence of healing and restorative feelings. I will present the activity of gardening by one of the Chilean exiles in the making of the installation of Geographies of the Imagination, and my creation of papers and the specific use use of fibers and types of embroidery used in the making of artworks for the installations of Mending the Past, Scattered Seeds of the Cotton Balls, and Family Movements. All these activities will be discussed in the context of imagining the homeland and creating collaborative artworks which provide restorative feelings to all participants. So first I'll talk about Geographies of the Imagination that you can see here. I created this installation during my artist in residence at the Center for Art and Public Life at the California College of the Arts from 2007 to 2008. During 18 months, I met with a group of 9 Chilean political exiles who have been living in the Bay Area of San Francisco for over 40 years and having been expelled by the government of Augusto Pinochet in 1973. During this period, we co-created 23 banners, monoprint banners depicting their reflections and memories of forced migration, and 9 videos in which the exiles recreated the homeland. Each creation entailed different forms of engagement with the community. Using Grant Kester's definition of participatory and collaborative, the creation of monoprint banners was participatory, in that I, as artist, had a degree of aesthetic control in the creation of the artwork. In the creation of the videos, however, the engagement with the participant was collaborative. The participants were involved in all decisions and making of the videos. The different forms of collaboration were in part influenced in the following ways. 1, the grants requirements. One of the grants specified my role as the artist. I stipulated that I'd be the maker of the artworks. Second, the varying degrees of art expertise of the participants who didn't feel comfortable in creating monoprints on their own. So we created, as I said, 23 monoprint banners, and I made most of the monoprints, and I was guided by the exiles' narratives and their guidance. So for example, in the image you're seeing right now is of Jaime, exiled, who wanted to convey his sense of multiple and ruptured identities. So he wanted an image of himself that on one side, it will be captured his memories of Chile and his past as a Chilean and the events that led to his forced migration. And then on the other side of himself, his life in California. And then a representation of his evolving or moving self that moves constantly from the California side to the Chilean side and showing his inability to have a complete self. In the
Lydia, can I
yes?
interrupt for a sec? The image I'm seeing looks like butterflies. Is that the image you are looking at?
No, it's an image of a man with a divided self.
I'm not
seeing that. Oh dear.
No, we aren't seeing that either, Lydia.
Oh dear. So you haven't seen anything that I've shown so far? No? Okay.
No, it was stuck on the one with the dragonfly.
Butterflies.
Flowers.
Yeah.
Butterfly or flower installation.
It was stuck on that one.
So now, for example, now what are you seeing?
We're
We
just
see
seeing
you.
you right
We
now.
don't, you're not sharing your screen right now.
Oh dear, I don't know what happened. Okay, so let me go back here, share the screen again, and back to this image, share.
All right.
It's good now.
Yeah.
It is good now? Okay, good. Okay, so I'll go back to some of the images. So this is a Geographies Imagination project that I was trying to show to you, where it has the 9 videos and the 23 monoprint banners that we created. And as I said, they guided me in the creation. So I would listen to their narratives, their memories, and try to portray their own aesthetic sense in the creation of the images. Like I said earlier, this part of the project has to be created by me because it was one of the stipulations of one of the grants we got. The second section of the project was the creation of videos, and the exiles had full control of the creation of the videos. And they wanted to be filmed at places where they were reminded of the homeland. So for example, in this image, are you seeing it, of this man in a dry area? Yes, good. So this is Fernando, who grew up in the desert. So there was only one place in the Bay Area where he would be reminded of the desert, and that was in Sibley Park, an area of the Bay Area that is very dry. And so he was filmed there. And this is Jaime on a different place. And what happened when I was filming them at these places, there were clearly 2 types of responses or forms of engagement with memories of the homeland. When they were at these places and they were engaged in contemplation of the place, they were invaded with feelings of nostalgia that they were bittersweet. They felt on one hand transported to the homeland, and then immediately they felt the distance of time, and there was this feeling of sadness about their lives, about themselves. There were also another way for them to recreate the homeland, and that was when they engage in activities that they used to perform in the homeland. And so when we filmed them engage in parties, they were dancing, playing soccer, there was a new self that emerged. So I'll give you the example here of Rosita, who chose her garden as the place where she felt transported to the homeland. And so this is what she said. When she's working in the garden, she said, wait, sorry. Working here, she said, digging my hands in the dirt, it reminds me of working in the farm, first thing in the morning, taking the roots that you didn't want there. It reminds me of my life there. It gives me much peace that I need. I need to have some of the country life here, not just plants for decoration. So then looking directly to the camera, with her face shining with pride, she said with great emphasis, that is me. When I'm gardening, I become my old self, the self before the events that radically changed my life. Through the act of gardening, touching the soil, digging with my hands, putting weeds, watering the plants, I become my old self. Okay, so let me talk about a current project. And I've been working on a series of installations aimed at expressing the memories and feelings associated with my family's experience during World War II and other Japanese Peruvians and their forced removal from Peru to incarceration camps in the United States. Collaboration has been with members of my family in Peru and Chile, and with descendants of Japanese Peruvians who were forcibly taken from Peru to camps in Texas during World War II, who contributed with their memories and their stories. Most of them conveyed feelings of estrangement and dislocation, something that I have observed with my family. My parents, whose families lived in Hiroshima, had migrated with their parents temporarily to Latin America, experienced a sudden divorce from the homeland when Hiroshima was bombed, destroying their ancestral home and killing their relatives. My father experienced also forced migration from Lima, Peru, a city in which he grew up, when the Peruvian government, pressured from the United States, labeled all Japanese Peruvians as enemies of the state, confiscated their properties, and sent them, thousands of them, to camps in Texas for the duration of the war. My father was forced to escape deportation to the US by moving to Chile. I grew up listening to my grandfather and my father telling stories that convey their sense of estrangement and dislocation in Chile, a country that made them feel always as foreigners. For these installations, I created flowers as a way of showing something that I believed would please their aesthetic sense and convey a tribute to their resilience and quiet suffering. For an installation at the Monterrey Museum of Art that was from September 2021 to January of this year, I made 75 flowers out of paper. I created these flowers out of mulberry fiber, a traditional fiber used in Japan for paper making, and yerba buena, an herb used in Chile for alleviated physical pain. The activity of creating the papers gave me a symbolic feeling of healing my family's suffering. Every batch of paper of the hundreds I produced brought me a sense of emotional restoration. After I made the papers, I printed using the paper lithograph method with images that depicted fragments of memories from all the stories I had gathered. Later, to further instill in each petal my desire to mend my family's sorrows, I used the Japanese technique of sashiko for restoring torn clothing. I used these techniques in another installation, which I'll show you quickly. Sorry, here it is. Flowers of memory, family, and displacement shown at root division to convey similar feelings. In this case, I included my own migration to the United States and the weakening of family ties created by different types of forced migration. Now, what is the connection between collaboration and feminist art? I suggest that from my experience of creating collaborative works, practices, particularly those which involve sensorial activities, highlight the feminist concerns such as emotions, the senses, relationality, and collaboration. They place the individual in touch with the imagined and felt experiences of forced migration. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can we go back just very quickly to the very beginning so you can review the slides that maybe we didn't see?
Absolutely.
If you could just go through them.
Yeah.
All right, so there's that. All right, I think we saw all of them then, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't want to miss anything you had put together. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Jane.
Thank you. Thank you, Lydia, and thank you all of the artists for sharing this wonderful work today. And really, I'm so moved by every single one of your narratives and explanations. Really wonderful work. I thought I would just post this image of Yaking Tan, who is a videographer staging performances around the world around ideas of Chinese labor and women in labor. She had Lam Po Po here in the cover of my book, Staging Art and Chineseness in Hong Kong, pushing a paper lion to the recycling center because her normal job is to put stacks of cardboard onto a cart every single day and bring them to the recycling center, where the recycling center gives her a couple dollars for the cardboard she picks up. And so my work on transnationalism, Chinese identity, feminism, ecofeminism, and global art in global exhibitions of contemporary art really is my focus, and which I wanted to bring into this discussion. But I really do thank Lydia and Susan for inviting me to be a respondent. I had originally anticipated being a part of my travels to Chicago, like all of us. And I was a co-chair of the session at CAA, which is why I thought, oh, this will be great. This is added to it, right? My activist colleague, Marcia Meskimen in the UK, and I had put together transnationalism, transculturalism, and diaspora, the feminist decolonial politics of terminology in art. And we also conducted our session on Zoom this year. But convening today our subject of feminism, art, and global action brought me to thinking about terminology, brought me to question in respect of Women's Caucus for Art, what they mean. What is feminism in the context of art, in the context of global action under cover of WCA? It's very easy to simply assume that we all know and are cohesive with these goals and aims. But to be accurate, the idea of a Women's Caucus for Art signifies coalition, a democratic constituency of women for the legislative aims of the polis in which we find ourselves, and purportedly the nexus of the community in the United States. As Marcia Meskimen once wrote for her edited volume, Homeland, Women and Citizenship, the name of woman does not presuppose a singular or universal concept of woman, or indeed man, but is ultimately defined by geography, nation, place, and from what we also gather from this panel, the planet as a place. And our panel today provides an explanation for this quote based on what we've heard by the artists. The concept of woman, by extension, feminism, is indeed not bound to a universal concept, but rather the feminist performance of global action and aesthetics, even as patriarchal relations of power remain deeply entrenched. Lydia's work shows transparently the politics of migration, the personal experience of forced exile between Japan and Latin America. Her subjects resonate with us today because they are subjects we all recognize, from the forced migration of Ukraine because Putin wants to restore, let's face it, patriarchal empire. But here's my question for us. As artists and art researchers living in this period of time, how are we to reconcile the politics of location, nation, and borders in the advent of anti-immigrant, anti-ethno-nationalist movements? Since 2016, I've been asking myself, what is my feminist responsibility? In the aftermath of the election of Donald Trump, underscoring the continuing political conservatism exemplified by the failure to elect the first woman in the United States to become a party nomination for president. Since then, the imminent overturning of Roe versus Wade shows the real development for current feminist politics. If indeed we now think of gender as a fluid, non-binary, non-boundary identity, does the loss of single entity coalition affect the fight for reproductive rights? How can we coalesce around a signifier that is no longer stable? Contradictions are not limited to this American problem in a divided world with xenophobia, racism, hypernationalism on the rise when considering migration, place, borders, as Nirmal emphasizes in her work. The burden of culture, she says, falls squarely on the women's shoulders. What can we attempt to resist in respect of patriarchal institutions, methodologies, relations of violence, when maintaining the sign of woman as subject-object of historical relations? In the curatorial and her expressive work by Nirmal, we've looked at this morning the embodied links between things that remain at the forefront of art and global action, underscoring the idea that race and ethnicity is the context for intersectional feminism. However, with Asian hate on the rise, mostly against Asian women, can we simply name an intersectional advocacy? Is it working? I think our panelists, Susan, Marguerite, Lydia, would all agree with Nirmal's point. As immigrants, we always exist in between things, places, cultures, memories, and identities. We are those unique bridges that carry the notion of interconnectedness within ourselves. The problem with feminism has always been the inability to represent the intersectional, but art enables the illustration of embodiment. Susan Osmond's practice is the example of this kind of cross-cultural bridging. She shows how performance is inextricably.
Dicey, but I don't know the last time that happened.
When you have sun, it's so, to me, it's so different, right? That's
Laura,
all-
can you mute Olga?
Rare, occasional winter where Flagstaff gets a ton of snow, and that can be a little hard to deal with. Because obviously it's not melt like.
All right.
Great, thank you.
About that. It took me a minute to find to mute. So why don't you go back a tiny bit?
Sure, I'll go back. I just have very little bit left.
Right.
In the curatorial and expressive work of Nirmal, we've looked at this morning, the embodied links between things remain at the forefront of art and global action, underscoring the idea that race and ethnicity is the context for intersectional feminism. However, with Asian hate on the rise, mostly against Asian women, can we simply name an intersectional advocacy? Is it really working? I think our panelists all would agree that as immigrants, we always exist in between things, between cultures, between memories, between identities. We are those unique bridges that carry the notion of interconnectedness within ourselves, suggests Nirmal. The problem with feminism has always been the inability to represent the intersectional, but art enables the illustration of embodiment. Susan Osmond's practice is the example of this kind of cross-cultural bridging. She shows how performance is now inextricably a part of the art engagement, how Moving Matters Traveling Workshop recognizes the empirical nature of performance today. We all need that optimism of participatory artworks in the cross-global settings, in front of theaters, in front of galleries, public squares. Ultimately, it's the bodies on display that make a huge difference. Similarly, Ms. Meskimen wrote about the locational terms for the artistic expression of women, representing their literal, figurative border crossings, not least transnational diasporic experiences that appear outside the norm of citizenship. On this premise, my exhortation is to be vigilant about our own individual embodiments, understand them as monuments that they are, much in the way that Marguerite Elliot has erected sculptural arrangements. The viewing public undertakes a usually modernist view of art. We traffic in the vocabulary of masterpieces. Van Gogh, Da Vinci still constitute the aesthetics of art for the general public today. If the vocabulary of monuments can create a different dialogue, as Marguerite proposes, to honor the ground which we stand, it must be around the central issues raised by this panel. We can no longer afford a paternity of artistic hermeneutics. So with this brief call to action, I would like to solicit a conversation about the urgency of feminist interventions into the increasing encroachments of authoritarian initiatives, abortion rights, don't say gay, don't say ethnic studies, hate crimes, gun violence. These are all part of the continuation of the patriarchal mandate as one that seeks power for power's sake. For them, the signifier of woman is a means to an end. If we are not part of this solution, though, we're part of the program for pre-existing methodologies of violence. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And so I would love to start off the conversation thinking about all of these big gestures that we've looked at today. And I find that many of the artists have been working for quite a while. I want to start with questioning Susan Osmond. You know, now that you're venturing forward, how are you seeing your past in relation to this moment in time that I've raised for Women's Caucus, essentially?
Well, that's a huge question. So I'll speak more about, I think I wanted to raise this question of process, because I think that as you brought up and several of the other works too, rather than, showing sort of the outcome, which anybody can go to our websites and see online and watch, things. I think that this question of these, I liked what you said about the embodiment, our embodiment as monuments, but it's also our, it's always in movement. And so I think that's what, if there's one message from that, is that we have to think of the process and not just, the outcome. And that isn't always easy to do as an artist, because of course everybody is looking at that outcome, and that's, so these questions of value are really imbricated in what I would see as the, feminist gesture, which is one that is always in process. And yes, it produces all these things, or we create an environment, or we interact with an environment that helps us to produce new work, like in the Moving Matters Traveling Workshop. But then, at some point we have to have it stilled. And, so even those who are curators, or, yourself as an art historian writing about these things, it seems that that's a really important moment too. How do you keep that thing that was produced in motion in our process? How do you keep it alive once it's in the gallery, or once it's out there as a sculpture? So maybe it's kind of, I'm asking a question back to you, Jane, and to Nirmal and to Lydia and others who are, like, what are you're creating the conditions for this work, but then how do you keep it alive for that public that might think, going to see the Mona Lisa in the Louvre is, that is art, right?
I know, right? And so it really dawned on me, looking at all your work in preparation for this event, that we're still in that space where artists, people think that art is Mona Lisa and Van Gogh. So, when you have work by Marguerite that has been establishing monuments to something else, as a way to perform something else, to perform a woman's caucus around issues, around the global context in which we're all talking about today. I just want to, sort of delve that out from you guys, because you're at the forefront of dealing with that performativity and that establishment of a monument always, aren't you? I mean, whether you're an embodied monument out there showing the world, this fragility, bottom line, or you're establishing a thing, an object that stays in place forever, which I find really compelling about Marguerite's work. You know, it's very different because it's a feminist action. It's very, very different. And so I would love to hear your take on that, Marguerite.
Yes, thank you, Jane. Yeah, when you say monument, automatically my brain says, no, no, no. To me, monument is like the male monuments to, you know, Confederacy, to the this, to the that, you know,
Exactly.
to male. It's very, for me, it's very male identified.
It is.
I see my sentinels, my sculptures, as more of a marker and a standing watch than a monument to anything, because it's not really a monument to anything. It's more like drawing our attention to the earth or whatever, you know, it's about, you know, the spiritual, the sacredness of the earth.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just, I hate, I hate
monuments. I do too.
Also, a lot of my work now is traveling. So it will travel from, so it's not necessarily permanent, but it travels. So it has a broader audience and addresses the public more. Also, I want to address in my chat, I said something about the climate crisis as affecting women more now than anybody else. And we are going to get migrants and immigrants, forced migration from the climate crisis. It's happening already. It's forced migration. And if women don't, you know, we're doing our best to call attention to it, but the climate crisis is definitely male driven. It's not a women's thing. So yeah, that's my 2 cents about that, because I see the climate and migration as so intertwined. You know, we're facing imminent destruction and climate are, you know, amongst us all, and women suffer the most because we're the ones that have the kids and the families, and we live in this anyway. Thank you. That's
it. Definitely. I feel like, you know, that's why I invoke that monument, because it is about male violence. So, but that is what people think is art today, don't they still? I mean, we haven't moved very forward. And so this embodiment that I invoke in the context of the monument is essential to a feminist effort, I guess, which I think Nirmal can talk to so well, right?
I would like to add and respond to something that Susan said about process. And I think that not much emphasis there is in the processual aspect of art making, and particularly in collaborative works. Because I think isn't that when you're collaborating with others, those are the moments of reflections, of ideas, is extremely fertile, that moment of communication, that it is not shown right in the final piece at all. So how can we shift and still be so focused on, you know, the monument, right? The Mona Lisa. How can we focus on that moment of creativity where I think feminism and collaboration are very well aligned, where there is that reflection, there is that communication, where there is a very kind of productive moment. And I think it will be interesting if one can shift to that. And as you know, Susan talked about the embodiment of those experiences.
Maybe just briefly, I might add that that is something with the Moving Matters. We try, you know, because we have the art and we're reacting to it, people see that when we do a performance. But I've also started to include like small QR codes in some of the art that I do, so people can use their phone, and then I tell the story of how it was made, things like that. Or else I have a video showing the artwork being made. And I think those things are, sometimes it's really simple and people are really curious about it too, right? So sometimes it doesn't have to be really complex design, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, I would like to respond to something that Susan mentioned, for me, I think it's about creating small incremental change right around your immediate surroundings. So I almost never curate outside of Milwaukee. And the inspiration for that is because I was feeling this discrepancy between how the art world thinks the coasts have the best art and not so much, you know, in the Midwest, especially a small town like Milwaukee, which is often overshadowed by Chicago. So bringing work from the outside in to the immediate community is my way of bridging. And yes, embodiment is part of my work, my studio practice, but I felt like it's limiting, and I wanted to kind of expand what is seen within the art world and the general public in Milwaukee. And so that's my foray into curation, which is, you know, why limit my role in connecting to just my own work, but expand it to others. As far as movement and time-based work, in the exhibition I curated last year, we included QR codes for interviews with the artists to speak about process. And I think that is a record of, you know, that you see the work, but also can dig into the process a little bit more through the interviews. And having collaborated with Lois on the projects that I only shared one project, but there's others. What revealed to me through that collaboration is that it's a unique project that she or I could not have made on our own, right? So that is just the hallmark of any collaborative work. And it takes so much of listening and communicating and negotiating and equal distribution of labor and resource that nothing else can, you know, can really get to that. So I think speaking about that process, like Lydia mentioned, is just so important because it's not limiting to the art world, right? It can be expanded to any number of political and social topics. So you're very right, Lydia, but that we need to have avenues to share collaborative work, the process especially.
Thank you. We're getting close to time here. Do we want to do any quick Q&As maybe for a couple minutes? Does anyone else have any other questions?
It would be great, Jane, if you could email us the writings you mentioned. I would love to have kind of a bibliography of
Absolutely.
this panel. Yes, that was amazing.
Absolutely. I will send you the bibliography.
It looks
I
like
think
Barbara
there's some
has a
questions in the
question.
chat.
Right.
What was that?
It looks like Barbara has a question.
Yes.
Barbara, go ahead.
Yes, I'm interested. I'm a painter and an installation artist for a long time, but I have one question that bothers me in any kind of presentation of artwork. The independence of the work without explanation. If you walk into a space and you look at what is there, without text, without video, without explanations about the work of any kind, the reaction of the individual viewer will be so varied according to his or her or their own experience, them it is now called. I'm talking about the value of the piece without interference of any kind from any explanation. For instance, when we were shown the butterflies, which are beautiful, they're just wonderful. They could mean many, many different things to different people if no one was directing what they were about. I once did an installation that was interpreted as memories of the Holocaust, which I did not have in mind at all. I'm just throwing that out there as an interesting idea from the viewer's point of view.
Wouldn't that have a lot to do with how the exhibit is then curated in the space in terms of the information that you're giving at the onset, the materials that you're offering to the viewer? Does anyone have some commentary on that?
That's exactly what I'm talking about, the object itself without information.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm talking about.
Well, for instance, Lydia, what sort of information did you put in with your piece so that people could understand a little bit more of what they were looking at?
There was a text that informed the viewer about the creation of the pieces, because I felt that it was crucial that they understood the process of creating them. And I think some people read it, some they didn't. But to answer Barbara's question, I think that the object is one aspect of the art production. I think one needs to see the stages too. And so they are different. I think that seeing artwork without any kind of information gives you some kind of a different experience than it would if you have access to the making of the object. I think they're different. More emphasis, I think, has been done to concentrate an object devoid from the maker or the process itself.
So it's more interesting, obviously, when you get deeper into the work and why it was made. I mean, it's a different, of course, it's a different experience and maybe a better one. But I also think that the object has to be valued for what it is.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm not denying that at all. I think the object, it is important and conveys very differently than the process itself. It's just, my comment was that we tend to emphasize only the object by itself and we don't look at the process. That's all.
Right. That's so good. That is such a great answer.
I
also think that the thing itself, though, even if it moves you in your own personal way, doesn't matter. You know, it sometimes a color, a touch, a material you will react to it. So does it really matter if indeed you have a personal? I'm asking this to you, Barbara. In the end, if you react to a work because it has some really individual personal reference, in the end, does it make any difference?
All right, I've had my paintings. I was in a show not too long ago and I had a painting. I do pretty abstract work. This man looked at it and said to me, it looks like an ice cream cone. Well, I looked at it and I thought, well, you know what? That could be an ice cream cone. I never thought of it that way. But he was not a sophisticated viewer in any way. He said what he thought it looked like to him. It looked like an ice cream cone. So that's out there for all of us to deal with. And art historically, I do have an undergraduate degree in art history. I never went on to graduate work, but I was thinking about, I was in a Zoom discussion and the Bernini, Saint Teresa and Ecstasy came to my mind. Now, if you didn't know, it's in a church in Rome. if you saw this sculpture and you didn't have an explanation for what it was about, what would come to you? I think that's true for centuries. And of course we want to know more about the work if we're interested and we're intelligently looking at it. But I do believe that the impact of the thing itself is very important.
We have a couple raised hands, Susan and then Nirmal.
Yeah, just, I wouldn't dispute that, of course. I don't think anybody here would say that, you know, if we make art, we think that it's powerful, but we're also making art for specific, you know, we decide if we're going to paint on a canvas or on a wall. And we also, you know, the gallery itself is a space that has its own ideology. And I think that when we're talking about feminist work and what collaboration can be, particularly with regard to our discussion today, we want to keep that in mind and not, you know, we can't, the thing, even as it moves around the world, is going to change. And it's not only about, yes, of course, we know different people interpret it differently, but it's also what we put into it and where we put it. And I think that as artists, we're thinking about that, as curators, we're thinking about that, and offering a range of possible experiences to the people who may interact with it, who may contribute to it in these different ways. So anyway, that's just a thought about that. It's not to say that the object doesn't count, it does.
Great, Nirmal?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention translation here, because I think especially in the context of intercultural work, intercultural visual art, it is important to give it some context, because easily the cultural context is dismissed and the object cannot stand on its own. So didactics, labeling, writing is extremely important, so the cultural context is not lost.
I think too, if you're very concerned about it, a very concise title can be helpful to the piece to help with interpretation. But that's on the artist deciding how they want it to be done. All right, do we have any other questions? We're nearing time. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone so much for this wonderful presentation. Delighted to have you participate in our second Saturday. And I'd like to give everyone a round of applause for a wonderful presentation. And this again will be recorded. It will be up on our website and YouTube channel in a couple weeks. So thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Very wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone. So great to be here together finally.
Yes, yes. Susan, I know Arijit Sen, who mentioned he's a big fan of yours.
Oh, thank you. Well, I hope we'll have a chance to all be in touch, you know, in the future. And even if I'm moving on, I'm not, you know, leaving anything behind. So, you know, some of us are, those in California, I know I'll be coming back here regularly. And for those in Milwaukee, you know, come and visit us in Abu Dhabi. Maybe we can get you to do some things outside of Milwaukee.
Sure.
I know.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. See
All right.
you later.